They say blood is thicker than water, but they never mention what happens when that blood turns to poison in your veins. I used to believe family meant everything. Now I know better. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, shattering my sleep like glass breaking against concrete. Scarlett's name flashed on my phone, each ring more desperate than the last. Anya, oh God. Her voice cracked through the speaker, raw with terror. It's Lily, there's been an accident. We're at General Hospital and the doctors say she needs surgery immediately. My heart stopped. 10-year-old Lily, with her gap-toothed smile and paint-stained fingers, was more than my niece. She was the one bright spot in our fractured family. I threw on clothes without thinking. I'm coming, I whispered. At the hospital, I found Scarlett and Leo huddled on plastic chairs. My sister looked smaller somehow, her usual polish replaced by mascara streaks and wrinkled clothes. Leo paced nearby, running his hands through his hair. Internal bleeding, Scarlett explained, clutching my hands desperately. Something about her spleen and liver. They need to operate now, but the insurance. Her voice broke completely. What about insurance? I asked, though I already knew. Leo's struggling real estate company had been cutting costs for months. $16,000 upfront, Leo said quietly. Without it, the number hit me like a physical blow. My entire savings contained exactly $11,000. But looking at their faces, I knew there was only one choice. I'll handle it, I heard myself saying. The next 4 hours became a blur of phone calls and desperate negotiations. I called my landlord, begging for a rent extension. I raised credit card limits I'd never intended to use. I even called my college roommate, swallowing my pride to ask for a loan. By dawn, I had cobbled together the $16,000. My savings read $127.43. My credit cards were maxed. But when Dr. Martinez emerged with news that the surgery had been successful, it felt worth it. She's going to be fine, he said with a tired smile. Full recovery expected within 2 weeks. Over the next 5 days, I visited Lily every morning and evening. Her room filled with balloons and cards. Scarlett and Leo played devoted parents to perfection. During one visit, I overheard Scarlett on her phone in the hallway, her voice animated. We're planning something really special for when she gets home, a huge celebration. Everyone's invited. I smiled, thinking about how happy Lily would be surrounded by family and friends. The text came Thursday evening while I was reviewing architectural plans. It was in our family group chat. Big announcement. We're throwing a huge welcome home party for our brave little Lily this Saturday at 2 p.m. at Pinebrook Event Center. Come celebrate our miracle baby's recovery. Warmth spread through my chest. Finally, a purely positive family gathering. I started planning what to bring. But 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a private message from Scarlett. Hey Anya. I know this might sound harsh, but we've decided it would be better if you didn't come to Lily's party. You've been carrying around so much negative energy lately, and we really want this day to be purely joyful for her. You understand, right? I stared at the message until the words blurred. Negative energy. The sister who had emptied her bank account was being labeled negative energy. My phone buzzed again. A photo on Scarlett's Instagram showed Lily in her hospital bed, surrounded by pink balloons, wearing a tiara and grinning widely. The caption read, Our little warrior princess is coming home. So grateful for all the love and support from our amazing family and friends. Family is everything. Number blessed, number grateful, number Lily strong. I scrolled through dozens of comments promising to attend the party. Everyone would be there to celebrate her recovery. Everyone except the person who had made it possible. I pulled out my old suitcase and began packing methodically. I called the airline and booked a one-way ticket to San Diego with my nearly empty checking account. Before leaving, I made one final call to the hospital's billing department, requesting they remove my name from all payment records and transfer the remaining $1,650 balance to Scarlett and Leo's account. You're transferring all responsibility to the parents? The representative asked. That's correct, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. It should have been their responsibility from the beginning. I left for the airport without telling anyone where I was going. The beach house I rented was tiny and weathered, perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. For 5 days, I walked on sand, read novels, and remembered what silence felt like without other people's emergencies filling it. When I finally turned my phone back on, I found 17 missed calls from Scarlett, 12 from Leo, and 4 from my mother. The voicemails ranged from confused to panicked. The hospital called about some billing issue. Scarlett's voice was tight with irritation. We need to talk. I deleted all the voicemails without responding. Returning home, I found my apartment unchanged, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. The silence that had felt healing at the beach now felt like strength. I'd remembered who I was, when I wasn't constantly fixing other people's problems. The envelope in my mailbox changed everything again. It wasn't a thank you card, it was a legal summons. Scarlett and Leo were suing me for a breach of verbal contract, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and financial sabotage endangering the welfare of a minor. They wanted $25,000 in damages. I sat holding the papers, feeling something crystallize inside me. It wasn't just anger. It was clarity, the kind that comes when someone shows you exactly who they are. I called Vivian Holloway the next morning. She had a reputation as a lawyer who didn't suffer fools gladly, specializing in financial fraud cases. "Miss Carter," she said, reviewing the lawsuit, "this is possibly the most ridiculous legal document I've seen in 15 years. They're suing you for refusing to be financially abused." "Is that what this is?" Vivian leaned back, studying me. "How many times have you provided financial assistance to your sister's family in the past 5 years?" I thought about it. Mortgage payments twice, school supplies for 3 years, half their car repair, countless gifts beyond my budget. "And how many times have they helped you financially?" The answer was obvious. Never. "When was the last time they thanked you for any assistance?" I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember a single instance. "We're going to countersue," Vivian said, becoming animated. "But more importantly, we'll document every financial transaction between you and them." I suspect the pattern will be very illuminating. 2 weeks later, we walked into the courthouse together. Scarlett wore soft pink, clearly dressed for maximum sympathy. She dabbed at her eyes with tissues, occasionally glancing toward the gallery where my mother sat with family friends. Judge Patricia Reeves was exactly the kind of woman I hoped to become at 60. Confident, silver-haired, with eyes that missed nothing. Scarlett's lawyer painted me as vindictive, claiming I'd abandoned a child out of spite over being excluded from a party. When Vivian stood, her confidence filled the room. "My client is not on trial for refusing to bankrupt herself for her family's convenience. She's here because she finally stopped being their personal ATM." Vivian methodically presented bank statements showing thousands of dollars I'd transferred over the years, text messages where they'd asked for money with emotional manipulation. One particularly damaging exchange was from 6 months earlier, when Leo had asked for $300 for Lily's gymnastics registration. I'd transferred it the same day. 3 weeks later, Scarlett posted photos from an expensive spa weekend, but the most devastating evidence came from Vivian's investigation. She discovered that only $11,847 of the $16,000 surgery bill had actually been paid to the hospital. The remaining $4,153 had been transferred to Sterling View Realty LLC, Leo's business account. "Your Honor," Vivian said, "the plaintiffs used their daughter's medical emergency to launder money into a failing business." The courtroom erupted. Judge Reeves called for order with sharp gavel bangs. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," the judge said coldly, "you diverted medical funds into a business account while suing the person who provided those funds?" Leo couldn't stay silent. "It was temporary. We were going to pay it back." "You stole from your daughter's medical fund and then sued the woman whose money you stole," Judge Reeves stated flatly. The ruling was swift. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Scarlett and Leo were ordered to pay my legal fees and warned that criminal charges were being referred to the district attorney. The victory was only the beginning. The story made the local newspaper 2 days later. "Local family under investigation for medical fund fraud." My phone rang constantly, but I answered none of the calls. The only call I took was from Lily herself, calling from school. "Aunt Anya, Mommy said you're mad at us. Are you really mad at me?" My heart broke. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you at all. I love you very much." "Then why did everyone say you don't want to see me anymore?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of explanations I couldn't give to a 10-year-old. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that are hard to explain. "But everything I did was because I love you and wanted you to get better." "I know that," she said matter-of-factly. "You made the doctors fix me. Thank you for saving me." After she hung up, I cried for 20 minutes. The investigation expanded over the following weeks. My mother had created a GoFundMe using my name and story that raised $12,000, all transferred to Leo's business. The platform froze the account after reports of fraudulent activity. Criminal charges were filed 6 weeks later. Scarlett and Leo were charged with fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. My mother was charged as an accessory for the fraudulent GoFundMe. Her voicemail was shaking with rage. "You're destroying this family, all because you couldn't handle being left out of one party. Is your ego worth destroying people who love you?" I saved the voicemail. It perfectly captured everything wrong with our family dynamic, still trying to make me the villain for refusing to be victimized. 3 months later, I found myself in an unfamiliar situation. Financial stability. No longer supporting Scarlett's family, plus the legal fee reimbursement and a work raise, meant money left over each month. I used it for something I'd dreamed about for years, a down payment on a small cabin by Lake Tahoe. The cabin was tiny but perfect, with a deck overlooking the water where I could work on freelance projects and remember what peace felt like. On my first weekend there, sitting with morning coffee, I experienced complete silence. No urgent texts, no family emergencies, no guilt trips. just water lapping against shore and birds calling across the lake. In that silence, I finally understood what I'd lost and gained. I'd lost the exhausting role of family ATM. I'd gained self-respect. The trial proceedings dragged on for months. Their lawyer tried negotiating plea deals requiring my forgiveness. Vivian advised I had no legal obligation to participate. They made their choices, she said. The consequences aren't your responsibility. Final resolution came almost a year after Lily's surgery. Scarlett and Leo pleaded guilty to reduced charges, sentenced to probation, community service, and full restitution. My mother's charges were dropped in exchange for testimony about the fraudulent fundraising. I used the restitution money to pay off the cabin completely. At 33, I owned my sanctuary. The last communication came on the surgery's 1-year anniversary. A card arrived at my work address with Scarlett's handwriting. I know you probably don't want to hear from us, but Lily is doing great. I'm sorry things got complicated. Maybe someday we can work things out. I miss my sister. I read it twice, then filed it with the legal documents. Not from cruelty, but wisdom. There was no acknowledgement of theft, no recognition of manipulation, no understanding why boundaries had been necessary. Just another attempt to reset without addressing what made the dynamic toxic. Some relationships don't recover from betrayal. Some families are healthier when smaller. 2 years later, I sat on my cabin deck with Marcus, a fellow architect I'd met at a conference, helping me build bookshelves for my growing novel collection. You seem different than when we first met, he said, handing me wine as the sun set. More settled, more sure of yourself. I thought about his observation. The woman who had rushed to that hospital felt like a stranger now. Not because I'd become uncaring, but because I'd learned the difference between generosity and exploitation. I learned how to say no, I told him, and that saying no doesn't make me a bad person. My life had transformed completely. I had savings again, a growing retirement account, freedom to make financial decisions based on my own goals. I'd been promoted at work, no longer distracted by family drama. The emotional transformation was even more profound. Setting boundaries didn't make me selfish, it made me healthy. Real love doesn't require constant sacrifice. I maintained one family relationship through careful distance. I sent Lily gifts through Vivian's office, including cards letting her know I thought about her, but without personal information they could exploit. On her 12th birthday, I received a handmade card decorated with flowers and hearts. Dear Aunt Anya, thank you for my art supplies. I am learning to paint landscapes like you taught me. I hope you are happy wherever you are. Love, Lily. The card was heartbreaking and hopeful, but I didn't respond. Any communication would eventually involve Scarlett and Leo, giving them new manipulation opportunities. 3 years after the surgery, Marcus showed me a newspaper item. Sterling View Realty had filed bankruptcy. Leo had lost his real estate license due to regulatory violations related to financial misconduct. I felt no satisfaction, but also no sympathy. They had prioritized short-term gain over relationships and integrity. The consequences were natural results of their choices. That week, I received a LinkedIn message from a social services worker. Your case has been used in our training materials as an example of financial abuse patterns within families. Thank you for speaking out. You've helped more people than you know. My story had become part of a larger conversation about financial abuse. By refusing to be quietly victimized, I'd contributed to something meaningful beyond personal healing. 4 years later, working on architectural plans for sustainable housing in my snowy cabin, I thought about the woman I'd been. She had been desperate for family approval, equating love with sacrifice, never questioning whether the people she sacrificed for actually loved her in return. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood the difference between helping and being exploited, between family love and manipulation. Outside, snow fell gently on the lake. The silence was complete, broken only by snowflakes against glass. I'd once feared this silence, mistaking it for loneliness. Now I recognized it as peace. My phone sat quiet. No emergency calls, no guilt trips, no manufactured crises. Just silence, space, and freedom to make choices based on my own values. 5 years after Lily's surgery, my assistant knocked on my office door. There's a young lady here to see you. She says she's your niece. Lily stood in the doorway, no longer 10 but a poised 15-year-old with quiet confidence. She had grown tall and lean, with eyes startlingly similar to my own. I've been wanting to talk to you, she began with remarkable maturity. I know there was a big fight, and I know it involved my surgery and money, but I'm not little anymore, and I've figured out things nobody wanted to tell me. She pulled out a manila folder. I've been keeping track for the past year, writing down conversations, documenting the pattern. With stunning maturity, she showed me pages of handwritten notes, photocopies, screenshots. She'd created her own investigation into her parents' financial behavior. They're doing it to other people now, always the same story. Emergencies, crises, promises never kept. She showed me a recent GoFundMe screenshot. This was 3 months ago. They said I needed emergency dental work, raised $3,800. I never had dental problems. Where did the money go? Dad's business debt, same as always. I'm basically their fundraising prop. Her eyes held too much knowledge for 15. I wanted you to know I understand what really happened, and I wanted to apologize for all the times they used me to manipulate you. You don't owe me apologies, I said through tears. You were a child. I know, but cutting them off was probably the hardest thing you ever did, and it was the right thing. Even if it meant I couldn't have a relationship with the one person in this family who actually cared. She pulled out a college brochure. I'm applying for early admission to State University's architecture program. Sustainable design and affordable housing, like your work. I was hoping you might write me a recommendation letter. I'd be honored, I said without hesitation. After she left, I processed everything she'd shared. Her folder contained enough evidence for multiple fraud investigations. More importantly, it confirmed my decision to cut contact hadn't been overreaction, but necessary self-preservation. Most significantly, Lily's visit proved that breaking the dysfunction cycle had been worth it. By refusing to enable Scarlett and Leo's behavior, I'd inadvertently shown Lily what healthy boundaries looked like. 2 years later, I received Lily's college acceptance letter with a full scholarship, along with her note, "Thank you for the recommendation and for showing me what integrity looks like. See you for coffee next fall." That evening, I took Vivian out for expensive champagne, toasting boundaries, accountability, and unexpected influences. "When I first met you," Vivian said, "you were convinced you were the selfish one. You believed setting boundaries made you bad. I did think love meant never saying no, never questioning whether people appreciated help. And now? I thought about Lily's transformation despite growing up in chaos. Now I know sometimes the most loving thing is refusing to enable destructive behavior. Even when that refusal looks like abandonment to people used to being enabled." Years later, I received Lily's graduation announcement. She was now a college sophomore with a 3.9 gigapascals, planning to study sustainable architecture in Denmark. The announcement included her photo at an affordable housing protest, holding a "Housing is a Human Right" sign. She had become exactly who I'd hoped, someone who used intelligence and passion to advocate for others, who understood the difference between helping and enabling. The announcement also brought troubling news. Scarlett and Leo had been arrested again for sophisticated charity scams involving fake medical fundraisers for fictional children. They faced federal charges and significant prison time. My mother, now in her 70s, lived in state-subsidized housing after losing her home to bankruptcy, systematically defrauded by Scarlett and Leo over several years. I felt no satisfaction in their troubles, but no guilt either. They'd had multiple opportunities to change, to acknowledge harm caused, to make different choices. Instead, they continued the same patterns until encountering consequences they couldn't manipulate away. 8 years after everything began, I found myself in court again, this time as a character witness for Lily testifying in the federal case against her parents. She had grown into a poised 23-year-old completing her master's degree while working for a nonprofit building homes for low-income families. Her testimony was devastating in its clarity, methodically documenting years of fraudulent campaigns using her name and fabricated conditions. When the defense tried characterizing her as vindictive, Lily remained calm. "I'm not testifying from anger," she said clearly. "I'm testifying because fraud is illegal and victims deserve justice. The fact that these criminals are my biological parents doesn't change legal or ethical reality." Scarlett received 4 years, Leo 6 years, with full restitution ordered to victims exceeding $200,000. After sentencing, Lily and I had dinner together. She seemed relieved proceedings were over but sad about testifying against her parents. "Do you ever regret how everything turned out?" she asked. "No, do you?" "No, I regret they made choices hurting people, including themselves, but I don't regret them facing consequences." She smiled. "I'm specializing in housing for people escaping financial abuse. There's real need for architects understanding that population's specific requirements." Watching her drive away, I felt deep completion. The desperate woman who'd emptied her account 8 years earlier could never have imagined her boundary-setting decision would help that same child grow into someone so principled. The journey from victimization to empowerment had been longer and more painful than expected, but transformative. I'd learned family isn't automatically sacred, love without respect isn't love, and sometimes courage means walking away from people insisting on treating you badly. Most importantly, healing isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes it's accepting some relationships are toxic, some people won't change, and some doors need permanent closure. Standing in the parking lot, looking up at clear night sky, I felt deep peace from knowing I'd made right choices, even when difficult. The stars were bright and steady, like the principles I'd learned to navigate by: integrity, self-respect, and understanding that healthy love never requires sacrificing well-being for someone else's convenience. Tomorrow, I'd return to designing homes for people rebuilding lives. Next weekend, I'd visit my lake cabin, where silence had become friendship. And someday soon, Lily and I would discuss architecture and sustainable design and building structures that weather any storm. The woman labeled negative energy had become someone creating positive healing spaces. The sister sued for refusing to bankrupt herself had become successful, helping others escape financial exploitation. The aunt, separated by manipulation, had somehow helped raise a young woman understanding the difference between love and exploitation. The real victory hadn't been winning in court or seeing justice served, though both mattered. The real victory was learning to value myself enough to walk away from people insisting on treating me as less than I deserved. Choosing healing over bitterness, boundaries over resentment, self-respect over family approval. Driving home through quiet streets, I realized my story was no longer about betrayal and vindication. It had become something more powerful: transformation. The courage to choose yourself when everyone expects you to choose them, and how protecting your well-being can protect others too. My phone remained blessedly silent. No emergencies, no manufactured crises, no guilt trips. Just silence, peace, and deep satisfaction of a life rebuilt on principles withstanding any storm. In that silence, I heard something I'd unknowingly searched for: the sound of a woman who'd finally learned to put herself first, discovering that hadn't made her selfish, it had made her whole. The epilogue of my story arrived 3 years later in the most unexpected way. I was presenting my sustainable housing project at an international architecture conference when a woman approached me afterward. She was middle-aged, well-dressed, with kind eyes that held a familiar weight. "Miss Carter," she said hesitantly, "I'm Sarah Morrison. I believe you knew my sister Jennifer, who was one of the victims in the Henderson fraud case." I remembered Jennifer from the court documents, a single mother who had donated her grocery money to what she thought was Lily's medical fund, only to discover it was another fake campaign. "Jennifer passed away last year," Sarah continued, her voice steady but emotional. "Cancer. But before she died, she asked me to find you if I could. She wanted you to know that your courage in pressing charges gave her hope during her own battle with a toxic family situation." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope. "She wrote this for you but never had the chance to send it." Inside was a letter in shaky handwriting. "Dear Anya, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to thank you. When I learned I'd been scammed by your family members, I was devastated. But then I read about how you fought back, how you refused to let them continue hurting people. It made me realize I didn't have to accept being victimized by my own relatives who were stealing from me during my cancer treatment. Because of your example, I found the strength to cut them off and focus on healing. You saved more than just yourself. You saved people like me, who thought we had to endure family abuse in silence. Thank you for showing us that love doesn't require martyrdom." I stood there, holding the letter, tears streaming down my face as Sarah waited quietly. This stranger's sister had found strength in my story during her darkest hours, had learned that she didn't have to sacrifice her well-being for toxic people just because they shared DNA. "She started a support group in her final months," Sarah said softly, "for people dealing with financial abuse from family members. It's still meeting monthly at the community center. They call themselves Boundary Warriors in honor of your story." That evening, I sat in my hotel room overlooking the city lights, rereading Jennifer's letter and thinking about ripple effects. My decision to stop being a victim hadn't just changed my life, or Lily Sitt had somehow reached a dying woman I'd never met and given her permission to protect herself too. The next morning, I called Lily, now 26 and working as a project manager for a nonprofit housing organization. I met someone whose life was changed by our story. I told her, sharing about Jennifer's letter. "That happens more than you might think," Lily replied thoughtfully. "I get messages sometimes from young people whose parents were using them for sympathy scams. They say seeing how I testified against my parents gave them courage to speak up too." She paused, then added, "I've been thinking about writing a book about it. Not just our family's story, but a guide for recognizing and escaping financial manipulation. Would you co-author it with me?" 6 months later, Blood Money, Breaking Free from Family Financial Abuse was published by a major publishing house. The book combined my perspective as someone who had escaped the victim role with Lily's insights as someone who had grown up being exploited as a manipulation tool. We included practical advice, warning signs to watch for, and resources for people ready to set boundaries. The book tour took us to dozens of cities where we met hundreds of people sharing similar stories. Adult children whose elderly parents guilted them into bankruptcy, siblings who discovered their emergencies were funding gambling addictions, spouses whose partners manufactured crises to control their finances. During a book signing in Portland, a young man approached our table with tears in his eyes. "My girlfriend has been reading your book," he said. "It made her realize her family wasn't having bad luck, they were deliberately creating financial chaos to keep her trapped. She finally cut them off last month and she's already sleeping better." These encounters reminded me that our pain had been transformed into purpose. The agony of being excluded from Lily's party, the stress of legal battles, the grief of losing my birth family, all of it had been redeemed through helping others recognize their worth. The book's success led to speaking engagements and consulting work with family counselors and financial advisors. I developed workshops teaching people how to identify manipulation tactics and create healthy financial boundaries. Lily started a nonprofit providing temporary housing for people escaping financially abusive family situations. On the 10th anniversary of Lily's surgery, we had dinner at the same restaurant where we'd eaten after her parents' sentencing. She was now married to a social worker who understood the complexities of family trauma, and they were expecting their first child. "I've been thinking about what kind of grandmother I want our baby to have," she said, rubbing her growing belly. "My biological grandmother chose manipulation over love, chose enabling over accountability. But you chose differently. You chose truth even when it was hard." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I want our child to know their great-aunt Anya, the woman who taught their mother that love doesn't require self-destruction, that family isn't automatically sacred, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away." Looking at this remarkable woman who had grown from the frightened 10-year-old in that hospital bed, I felt the deep satisfaction of a cycle broken. Her child would grow up understanding healthy boundaries from birth, would never doubt their inherent worth, would know that real love enhances rather than diminishes. The financial manipulation that had defined my family for generations ended with me. The pattern of exploitation disguised as devotion would not be passed down to another generation. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is refusing to perpetuate its dysfunction. As we left the restaurant that night, I thought about the woman I had been, desperate for approval, terrified of conflict, convinced that love meant endless sacrifice. She felt like someone from another lifetime, a cautionary tale rather than my actual past. That desperate woman had become this: an internationally recognized expert on family financial abuse, an author whose work helped thousands of people escape toxic dynamics, a mentor to young professionals learning to build healthy careers, and most importantly, an aunt who had helped raise a niece who understood the difference between love and manipulation. The stars were bright that night as I drove home to my lake house, where Marcus was waiting with hot chocolate and updates on his latest architectural project. My phone lay silent on the passenger seat, not because I was hiding from the world, but because I had built a life so healthy, so boundaried, so genuinely loving that crisis and chaos no longer had a place in it. In the quiet darkness, I whispered a thank you to the universe for the midnight phone call that had started everything. Without that moment of crisis, I might never have discovered my strength. Without being pushed to my breaking point, I might have continued accepting scraps disguised as love. The girl who had once begged for a seat at the family table had learned to build her own table, one strong enough to hold real love, genuine respect, and the kind of peace that can only come from knowing your worth is not negotiable.